So thank you again for joining us both online and in person here at the James Castle House in Boise, Idaho, located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Platte people. For a special presentation from Valerie Balint, the director of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program. My name is Mackenzie Dunstan. I am the Grants and Outreach Manager for the Boise City Department of Arts and History, which manages the James Castle House. And I have truly the supreme pleasure of not only being the host tonight for this event, but reuniting with Valerie, who has been a really wonderful collaborator and mentor to me on past programs, particularly the Historic Artist Homes and Studio virtual road trip, which we did for 3 seasons. It was really fun. Working on that program with you and all the participating sites was both a wonderful learning experience, and I'm forever grateful for the opportunity. I loved working on that program, so thank you for doing that, and of course for being with us here tonight. So Valerie is going to speak really in conjunction. Her talk is speaking to this exhibition that you see all around us here at the James Castle House, which is called Where Art Begins, the People and Places of the Historic Artist Homes and Studio program. Where Art Begins features over 60 stunning photographs of artists in their creative sanctuaries, from Georgia O'Keeffe, don't know where she is here in the, back here, hidden behind the screen, in her New Mexico compound, to Norman Rockwell and his Massachusetts studio, to, of course, James Castle here in Idaho. These images offer us a glimpse into the intimate settings that shaped these artists' lives, their creative processes, and their artworks. This exhibition was organized by HAHS and was made possible through funding through the Wyeth Foundation for American Arts, with additional support from the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens. Printing and framing, we're super thankful for, was partially funded by the Son Fine Arts. So our staff here at the James Castle House is really so thrilled to have this exhibition on our walls through early November, and of course to be a member site, of this really diverse network of artist homes all over the country. So I have a few housekeeping notes before I pass the mic to Valerie. This event is being recorded and will be made available online in the coming days. ASL interpretation is provided by Lavona Andrew Carson. Thank you, Lavona. She's providing for our online audience. Virtual attendees can also access English language captions by clicking on the live transcript button at the bottom of their screen and clicking Show Subtitle. At the end of this presentation, we're going to host a brief Q&A period. So virtual attendees, you can add your questions to the Q&A box. And then those of you in person, you may have noticed there's a little note card and a small pencil. Please feel free to jot down your questions or thought at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to them at the end. And then after Valerie's presentation, we are going to be hosting a reception here at the site. So in-person attendees, I hope you can join us. And virtual attendees, please know that you'll be missed. All right, let's get on to our main event. So I am so pleased to introduce Valerie Balint, a leading voice in the national effort to preserve the creative spaces where American artists lived and worked. As mentioned, she is the director of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios program, which is part of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the author to Guide to Historic Artist Homes and Studios, which was published by the Princeton Architectural Press in 2020. Before taking the helm at HAHS, she spent 17 years at Frederick Church's Olana in New York, where she served most recently as the interim director of collections and research. Valerie has also held curatorial positions at other HAHS sites, including Chesterwood and the Freilinghuisen, Morris House and Studios. In addition, she served as New York State's coordinator for the Save Outdoor Sculpture, a program of the Smithsonian American Art Museum dedicated to documenting all public sculpture in the United States. Throughout her work, Valerie has been a passionate advocate for preserving artist environments and as a vital piece of our cultural history, not only for their historical value and significance, but for the possibilities that they hold shaping a more inclusive future. Under her leadership, HAHS has placed a growing emphasis on broadening and diversifying its membership to better reflect the full richness of American art. This includes actively identifying, listening to, and mentoring sites that honor the legacies of women artists, artists of color, indigenous artists, LGBTQ plus artists, and self-taught artists like James Castle, all while expanding the very definition of what constitutes preserved artist material culture. So through these efforts, Valerie has helped spotlight a wider range of artistic narratives, practices, and traditions, as well as the everyday humans who have kept these creative legacies alive in the here and now, uplifting those unique intersections of place, preservation, and public access. So please welcome me in welcoming Valerie Balint.
Good evening, and thank you, Mackenzie, for that lovely and warm introduction. It's a mutual fan club around here, and to Lavona for her contributions this evening as an ISL interpreter. My special thanks also to you, Monica Galvin, and Kristen Hill, for this beautiful hanging of the exhibition that is on view behind me, and to Director Jennifer Stevens and the entire Castle team, that includes the IT team, for all their efforts to make this evening possible. For me, this is a sort of homecoming, and I was first here for the opening of this site and its celebratory symposium in 2018. And the James Castle House was accepted into Historic Artists' Homes and Studios the following year. On that first visit, I was incredibly moved by the power of place that was all around me. That is the very essence of what these sites of artistic heritage have to offer. And I feel it again as I stand here today and have been here over the last couple days. I continue to appreciate the tremendous effort by the city of Boise that they needed to undertake to preserve this property and to make the commitment to steward this important site of artistic heritage in concert with active community engagement. It is increasingly rare, I can't even express to you how rare, for a municipality to dedicate itself to this type of perpetual legacy. To preserve places representing this level of artistic excellence and compelling biography requires innovation, dedication, and long-term resources. The Castle House is a gift they have given to everyone. It's a gift they give to the world, honestly, no matter where you live. So I'm delighted to be here to talk about the site's current exhibition, Where Art Begins, which places James Castle and his former home in a more national context. As the title of the exhibition suggests, these places are at the very center of artistic biography and process. And tonight, I hope to take you on your first short excursion of these artist portraits and the wondrous places that are associated with them. My goal is to provide a bit of further insight into these arresting images of artists, their personalities, and of course, the sites preserving their legacies. But before we embark on what is admittedly, as far as I'm concerned, a very brief journey, I'd like to let you know a bit more about our program and our work. Historic Artists' Homes and Studios, as Mackenzie mentioned, is a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, begun in 1999 to fill a gap in advocacy and critical networking for this specific set of sites. And what began as a membership of 20 sites has grown to a consortium of 80 sites across 31 states, collectively representing the legacies of more than 300 artists spanning 4 centuries. Now celebrating our 25th anniversary year this year, HAHS, as we call ourselves, or HAHS, as other people sometimes call ourselves, up to interpretation, remains the leading voice and mentoring arm of sites of this kind, which sit at the fulcrum between art museum and historic site. This program is a broad-based membership of independent museums and sites, and each year prospective members are asked to apply, and then those applications are peer-reviewed. All HAHS member sites are the preserved homes and former working studios of historical, and when I say historical, I mean deceased in this context, American visual artists, now professionally managed, open to the public, and educationally interpreted. And collectively, these sites welcome more than 2 million visitors annually to engage in place-based learning. So visiting these sites is kind of like taking an Art Survey 101 course. And sort of something I love about the program is that we seek to represent the breadth and depth of the places where visual art was made in this country. So painting and sculpture, but also folk art and photography and decorative arts such as ceramics. From the sprawling spaces that minimalist Dave Donald Judd created in an old sewing factory in New York's Lower Manhattan, to the log cabin studio Western painter Charlie M. Russell built out of recycled telephone poles in the suburbs of Great Falls, Montana, to the artist colony that immigrant and ceramicist Marguerite Wildenhain established in California's Russian River Valley, and everywhere in between. And I feel it's necessary to point out, all of these images are from the exhibition. This exhibition and the HAHS program include artists and places you may be familiar with and those awaiting your discovery. So some of you may know Andrew Wyeth, and he is the center figure in 3 generations of artistic legacy. And his local boyhood environment of Chad's Ford and nearby Crooner Farm fueled him his entire career. He never really went anywhere else except for Maine. He made works in a converted schoolhouse turned studio, and to be there is to better understand the work, but also the complexities of this deeply introspective human being. By contrast, likely less familiar is Grace Hudson, the formerly educated portrait painter of the indigenous Pomo people, who, along with her ethnographer husband, designs an arts and crafts home in Northern California's Mendocino Valley. So let's just take a quick look a little more inside. This is the sign on Andrew Wyeth's studio door. So that lets you know immediately the kind of person we're dealing with. But it's a good reminder that these were ultimately private spaces, and we're sitting in a private space right now, and we are entering the inner sanctum. It's interesting to see what various artists needed to inspire them or what environments they needed to surround themselves with in order to be productive. In this way, I would argue, each preserved space also serves as a kind of portrait, a unique representation of the artist who lived and worked there. And like Andrew Wyeth, each artist in HAHS is complex and fascinating in myriad ways. This evening, I hope to get to have you know some of them, both through the images of them in their spaces, but also the spaces themselves, and of course, specifically, the portraits that are here in the gallery. But first, oopsie daisy, first I want to take a little detour. Here, in case no one knows, is the Lincoln Memorial. I'm pretty sure everybody here knows what it is. And this has become a place of pilgrimage for millions and is perhaps our nation's most famous work of art and recognizable work of art in the world. But it is easy to forget that objects like this were made by a person, and they were made in a place, created through intense physical work and engagement with mental creativity and genius, by artists who were all contemporary and groundbreaking in their own eras, and who lived in places that both inspired them and were transformed by them, in places where they lived out their life narratives. So if art in museums and galleries or a public monument represents the output of experience and process, these preserved sites represent all the input. And I would argue, like, that's the great stuff, is all that input. And at artist sites, you're stepping into a laboratory, the incubator for ideas, a place for experimentation, for trial, and also for error alongside success. And the objects that you encounter provide a direct link back to creativity, from inception to manifestation. So my own journey and appreciation for these sites began here at Chesterwood, the summer home and studio of Daniel Chester French. I visited here on a special arts program with my family at the age of 10. Yes, I learned about the Lincoln, of course, but I also discovered how he built that ingenious rail track to take works out into the open air. I roamed around the artist-designed gardens and woodland walks and took in the majesty of the view of nearby Monument Mountain. I heard about the family life he nurtured here and how he called this place heaven. More than a decade later, when I went to apply for my very first professional internship and saw an ad for Chesterwood, all the sensory power of that first visit flooded back to me in an instant. I could smell the autumn leaves, I could hear that fountain, and I saw the sight of like the beautiful sparkling marble in the studio. I still feel that power of place when I visit there today, and that is what every site in this network has to offer. And I hope to evoke some of that for you this evening. But the historic images of these artists and their spaces also have much to teach us. Here, French stands next to a full-scale clay model of his Spirit of Life figure for Saratoga Springs, and that's him in his Chesterwood studio. You get a sense of what kind of space is required to make monumental sculpture and insight into the process of art making. French was known to always wear a shirt and tie in the studio, and that right away just gives you a little sense of like the man behind the monuments. Next to him is an image of another figurative sculpture. Czech-born Albin Polášek first made a living executing ecclesiastical works in churches around the Midwest. And here you see him equally formally attired, but working on a smaller clay version of a work that will likely become enlarged in future iterations. He went on to have a successful career as head of the sculpture department at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for more than 30 years. And like French, he too created a retreat home and studio, in this instance, for his retirement in Florida. It includes Moravian and Slavic influences of his childhood, such as the colorful tiles in the courtyard. But soon after moving, he suffered a stroke, which paralyzed his entire left side. Wheelchair-bound, he continued to sculpt with only one hand. And here are the personal stories that, for me, are so universal and resonate with everyone when you visit these sites. The desire to continue to create, no matter what, which was present in James Castle. Polášek's landscapes were designed to feature his works, and this is the sower, a male figure sowing the seeds of his future, a self-determination allegory which served as one of Polášek's personal credos. Know that each of these sites and artists warrant entire seminars of their own, monographs, retrospective exhibitions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I am just going to scratch the surface. But I also want to use the sites I've selected for the rest of this talk to flesh out some of the larger concepts about artist spaces and why they are so incredibly important. Here are two people we think we know. Jackson Pollock and his wife Lee Krasner lived together in a small hamlet beyond the center of East Hampton, Long Island, in a humble cottage painting in an outbuilding which overlooked a saltwater creek. And here they are in their respective painting modes, both very, very active processes. And here is their studio, a former fishing shack with no hint of the wonders within. And here is the interior of that building. When you visit, you stand on that floor and process is all around you, not just on the floor, but on the walls where Lee's painting arcs extended beyond her tacked-in canvas and then like spattered onto her boots and his nearby stool. This experience, as I know firsthand, is transformative. That is a detail, not a painting, a detail of that floor. And you may not know or like or care about anything about abstract expressionism before you go there, but I assure you, it all, you get it when you are there. And if, like me, you have seen hundreds of Pollock paintings on museum walls, this makes it all come together for you. This is the embodiment of the physical process of art, and you just cannot get that anywhere else. Here is someone you probably never heard of, by contrast. The Denver-based artist and teacher Vance Kirkland. Kirkland met with early critical success, but largely turned away from commercial production of art to pave his own path. This is an example of him working on a dot painting. He had synesthesia, a condition in which there is sensory overlap, and in this case, Kirkland saw colors when he listened to music. At the age of 26, he started the Kirkland School of Art. The main classroom that would later become his personal studio has now been preserved. This is you're seeing on the screen the interior of the studio workroom, and those are straps suspended from the ceiling where he would lay on his belly over the work table and work on large-scale works underneath them. This is an aspect of the process, kind of like French's railroad tracks that they developed to create their work, and you can't see this unless you go to the site itself. Here you also see the painting I showed you in the previous slide, hung among those objects Kirkland collected and was drawn to aesthetically, providing insight into this specific artist in a way that just doesn't happen if you were looking at the painting by itself. Many artist houses are also associated with inspiration, the environment serving as a favored subject matter of the artists who lived and worked there. This is someone many of us feel we know, Winslow Homer. He's one of the most famous artists in all of the art canon, in front of one of his marine works painted at his home and studio in Prouts Neck, Maine. This photograph reinforces the image we have of him, of this grizzled recluse of a man up in rugged Maine, an image he helped to perpetuate, by the way. He lived and worked out of a converted carriage barn, which was part of a larger complex of buildings owned by his family. Notice there are minimal windows on this building, and this is a painter. So I want you to look at that balcony. This is the view from that balcony, and his brother used to say Homer would wear out the floorboards from pacing on it all the time. This was a view Homer came to know intimately. The cliff walk is just a short way from the studio, and either before or after your visit, you can go see the picture weather-beaten on view at the Portland Museum of Art, which owns this site. This view, because you're looking at the painting and you're looking at standing at the cliff walk, this view makes you understand Homer, what moved him as a man as well as an artist. You stand in the painting when you are there. You feel the wind, you hear the surf, and you taste the salt. It is an immersive experience that really is not replicable, and which provides insight into the mental processes of art making. I feel this is similar to James Castle's work, where he was capturing his distinctive Idaho environment intimately, while also infusing these works with his own singular perspective. Many artists chose to live in urban environments, as in the Greenwich Village home of Chaim Gross, arts educator and direct carver. Here he is seated in the studio he helped design, and you can see how intact it is to the current view. We could literally just drop him right back in there and we wouldn't notice the difference. All the tools of the trade are here. The chisels, the clamps, and rough logs, but also preparatory works which were never publicly exhibited or sold, providing opportunities to not only see successful works, but experiments that might have been abandoned. You can start to make connections between the process and the finished works, because at their very core, these places are about where art was made. You have, as noted art historian and my colleague Wanda Korn has said, returned to the scene, as she calls it, the crime. By definition, these sites as homes also allow a visitor to step beyond the studio, to view the intersection of the personal and the professional, or rather their integration, which is true for so many artists. And if there are artists in this room, they know what I mean by that. The objects an artist collected, what works might inspire them, as African masks did for Gross, but also evidence of the realities of daily life, such as the record player, all inform our holistic view of what they ultimately created, as does seeing the preserved wallpaper we get to view when we visit James Castle House. One can also begin then to discern the composing of objects that often occurs as an extension of what happens in the studio, because those impulses to arrange or to tinker with one space do not stop when an artist closes their studio door. The Gross home was a lively one, filled with students, writers, and other creatives. And these sites are often a reminder that all artists create as part of a larger community, even if in James Castle's case, that community really comprised a very supportive family. Other sites allow us to explore the synergies and differences between artists who were married, as were George L. K. Morris and Susie Frelinghuysen. This is an artist couple who was deeply involved in the American abstract artist movement. And they built a country retreat they designed in concert with a local architect. That's glass, brick, stucco, and a fresco by Morris in the garage breezeway. This was one of the first modern structures in the state of Massachusetts. Morris was the more introverted of the two, and Frelinghuysen was a born performer. And I think just in these two photos on screen, you can kind of already see the difference between that. This is a really interesting couple. He was an art critic and editor, and she was also an opera singer. Here she is in publicity shots for the City Opera of New York in the title roles of Aida and Tosca. Susie saw these different arts as complementary. She said, in music, you arrange yourself, and in painting, you compose the elements of a composition. Here is the living room of their home, replete with an Argentinian leather floor, Art Deco furnishings, and Susan's impressive piano in the back. This was a glamorous couple, and this house and photos of them reflect that. But I want to draw your attention to the murals and bas-relief by Morris on the wall. There are frescoes, reliefs, and murals by both George and Susie throughout this house. And many sites include in situ works of art that can only be seen when visiting the places for which they were originally designed. These are Susie's murals in the dining room. This is a totally different style and color palette than her husband. And she has actually inserted corrugated metal into the fresco surface to create a sculptural element. Other types of artists also expand their creative muscle even further to design homes that are a total work of art, as did woodworking virtuoso Sam Maloof, whose preserved home is in Southern California. As we have already seen, some artist portraits can be candid shots of artists caught in the moment of art practice, while others represent carefully posed portraits that conjure questions related to ideas about personal branding and the reinforcement of the artist's genius persona. So which one is this? It's complicated. It's clearly posed. But for me, this image is a reminder of Sam's intensely tactile relationship with everything he made. He loved the object and the journey in making that object. To the right is an image of one of Sam's rockers, which is in the collection of the Smithsonian. And farther right is a staircase he built in his home. And what I love about it is an example of Sam's commitment to considering non-conventional materials. This is made with laminated wood, taking from packing wood cases used to transport boats, speedboats, overseas. And what I love about it, you're like, what's that got to do with James Castle? But it shows the essence of like, the ethos of an artist. If it's there, they can figure out how to use it in a new and interesting way, and it's not precious. Nothing's precious. Here is the wood shop on property where over 5,000 handmade pieces of furniture were made, and this is the person, wife and artist Elfrida Maloof, his wife, known as Frida, who oversaw that workshop for half a century. This is the aerial view of the Maloof property set against the San Gabriel Mountains. And like the exquisite furniture he designed, Maloof intrinsically understood that there should be interest in every angle of his house. Freda and Sam designed the exterior and interiors of the house together, and the result is a visual poem of their life together. Here you can see a signature table and chair of Maloof's design, combined with Frida's collection of Native American pottery and textiles, as well as contemporary art of California painters and sculptors. These sites also offer opportunities to witness an artist's evolution and experimentation over time, demonstrating that artists live lives in real-time continuums. They invent and then reinvent themselves. And that progression is traceable by visiting these personal spaces. Here, Ann Norton, arts educator, painter, and sculptor, carves a figurative piece, which is ultimately installed in the landscape she co-designed. And this picture just tells you she's like right in the thick of it. She's got her little hat, and she's just there with the chisel chiseling away. But on the same property are these works, late in career, bricks hand-formed, and home-fired, a completely different mode of creativity. They sit in a tropical oasis Norton conceived of while suffering from terminal leukemia, with a desire to leave in perpetuity this property for her community. By immersing ourselves in these personal spaces of creativity, when we go, we physically inhabit them, bringing together our perspectives and experience. I like to say it's a conversation that happens, while also gaining access to the wide range of sensory and biographical elements that make each artist and each place unique. Not everyone decides to build their dream home or studio from scratch. Some demonstrate the ingenious application of what we call in the preservation field adaptive reuse, taking an existing building and transforming it to suit your needs and vision. Georgia O'Keeffe's home and studio in Abiquiu, New Mexico is perhaps one of the most famous examples. She had to wait years until the Catholic Church would sell her this property, and then she painstakingly made it her own through the restoration of the traditional adobe, but also added modern touches such as the large 1950s picture windows to optimize her views. Here is the image from the exhibition. O'Keeffe carefully crafted her persona through images that she had taken of herself. She chose specific photographers and clothing and was most often captured in black, and this is a rarer example of her in white. She would have learned the power of photographic imagery through her husband's work, the well-known gallerist and photographer Alfred Stieglitz, who took some of the earliest images of her. And here she is in her signature black, again, very carefully crafted. The infamous black door in her inner studio courtyard was the subject of more than 20 paintings, and the desert landscape that inspired her has now become synonymous with this artist and her work. Here is the interior of her sitting room, looking out at trees, another favored subject. And this space is punctuated by very few objects, like this Bertoia bird chair, which almost serves as a sculpture in the room. The aesthetic spare quality is both expected and representative of this artist who we call the mother of modernism. But the most crowded room in the house is the kitchen and the pantry. And it reveals the artist was also a foodie who cared deeply about food sustainability practices. And these are the types of personal, idiosyncratic, and interesting things about an artist in their life that you get to learn when you go to these spaces. As a comparison is Grant Wood's space in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. This is the painter of one of the most appropriated images in all the visual lexicon. I've seen it on lunchboxes, I've seen it on magnets, I've seen it on beach towels, American Gothic. This image shows the persona Wood sought to create, wearing a white shirt, black wingtip shoes, and overalls, referencing simultaneously both the farm and factory workers of the region. This is in part personal branding and persona making. Wood had traveled and studied in Europe, yet said all the really good ideas I ever had that ever came to me came while I was milking a cow. The exhibition walls all contain quotes like these, giving us a bit of entree into the artist, but also, in this case, their sharp wit. So this person and this painting happened in a converted garage given to him by patrons. This is a masterwork of DIY and loft living. Literally no space is wasted. He lived here with other family, and he made a bathtub out of an old hay chute space. He used a bushel basket as the stove mantle and metalwork of his own design on the radiator screen and light fixtures. And this small space is a reminder that many artists struggle financially in their own era, and that masterworks and, iconic artists that we all know were created in these humble spaces, just like at James Castle. Another aspect of his wry sense of humor, the front door. This is made from a coffin lid because the funeral home was next door. He painted on a glass clock with funny sayings like, "I'm taking a bath" or "having a party." And the satire of his paintings finds expression in his own home. And so we come to understand that this is an intrinsic part of who he is and not just what he does. Conceptual artist David Ireland adapted his own space from a Victorian home in San Francisco. Here, Ireland is creating a sculpture by tossing concrete between two gloved hands until it becomes a perfect sphere. It gives us a sense of the irreverent nature of this artist and a little bit about what's going to happen when we go inside. He did a series of maintenance actions, what he deemed maintenance actions, returning the architecture to its original bones. He even recorded the cracks and history of the plaster walls through numerous coats of polyurethane. That's what you're seeing. So when you're in there, it glows like amber, and it's like being in this little like lacquered jewel box. He used everyday objects as artworks. Here are the works he made from brooms that he literally used to sweep up the refuse in his house, and a broken chair is mounted to the wall. And yes, that is a chandelier made from propane torches. This site breaks conventional ideas of home and studio. The whole thing is really just one large art installation by one creative vision. Other artists push boundaries in other ways, as African-American artist Noah Purifoy did in Joshua Tree during a second act of his artistic life. At age 70, he moved to Mojave after 11 years of policy work for the California Arts Council and education initiatives at Watts Tower in LA. Purifoy transferred his practice entirely outdoors, where he lived the last 15 years of his life, creating 10 acres full of large-scale sculpture on the desert floor, basically making the desert floor itself the studio. Constructed entirely from junked materials, this environment breaks with ideas of traditional studio and media altogether. The photo on the right lower is in the exhibition and shows Purifoy at Joshua Tree. And so often we see artists only represented in their youth. So I love that this shows him vibrant and still creating in advancing years. I want to briefly touch about artists who are underrepresented or traditionally don't fit into the main frame of art history and who we are actively seeking to bring into HAHS, as Mackenzie has mentioned. Folk artists, indigenous artists, people of color, and self-taught artists like James Castle. Often the story of these preservation of these sites is unique and continues to be fragile. For example, James W. Washington was a sculptor, author, and activist in Seattle. Washington serves as a rare example, singular to my knowledge, of an African-American artist who secured their own legacy, creating a foundation. Oops, excuse me, corrected. Noah Purifoy did the same, but only two I know of. Washington created this foundation along with his wife, Janie, while they were still living. The image shows him with one of his signature headpieces, which he carved directly from stone, and you see the same piece on the mantle of his preserved home today. We continue to seek sites, more sites associated with women. This is photographer Alice Austin, and we get an immediate sense of the personality and nonconformity of this artist. She lived in her family home on Staten Island, Clear Comfort, most of it with her partner Gertrude Tate, who is facing us. She rode a bicycle into nearby New York City in a full corset with pounds and pounds of camera equipment in tow to capture life in Lower Manhattan. She was one of the first to focus images of urban life and immigrant portraits, and you can see an example of that, of her work Shoe Shine Boys on the lower right on the screen. She was groundbreaking in so many ways, but Austin's full identity was not truly legitimized in her own lifetime. Her family did not allow her and Gertrude to be buried next to each other. Yet today, her former home is now a nationally designated LGBTQ site. And by the way, there are less than 100 of these in the nation. As HAHS continues to expand, we also are now including what we call artist-designed environments. Eddie Owens Martin, who later named himself Saint Ohm after a transformative spiritual experience, was basically largely self-taught. His larger-than-life and eccentric persona is on full display in this image. This is how he was. This is how he was in the world. But it also reflects his multidisciplinary artistic interests, from everything to fashion, to painting, to jewelry, to furniture and sculpture, and more and more and more. He is a wonderful example of how an artist can expand their expression into many different media, much like James Castle. At his former childhood home, he created Pasaquan, executed over the course of 30 years, with more than 900 feet of elaborately painted masonry walls. Here, this LGBTQ+ activist fused cultural and religious symbols and designs using global inspiration. Like Eddie Owens Martin, Clementine Hunter was self-taught. Hunter worked her whole life as a field laborer and later as a domestic at a rural plantation in Louisiana. She did not even begin to create art until midlife and when she was a grandmother, using discarded materials from a visiting artist. And it just shows it's never too late to get creative. None of us have an excuse. Here she is in the dense foliage on the plantation. She could paint almost anywhere and needed to be able to paint when she could steal time away from her demanding work on the plantation. This is one of the buildings on site, designed, built, and used by enslaved people in an earlier generation than Hunter, who was born emancipated but living in a segregated America. And this is what she created in that space's upper floor, a series of epic murals on plywood depicting her daily life on the plantation, like going to work, cotton picking, and laundry day. These are deeply personal and break with traditional artistic convention. We used to call this outsider art, but it's really insider because only she can tell this singular story. It is said that she, like many artists, needed to create every single day. She is an inspiring example of a driving will, one that beats against adversity to find a means to express her unique creative voice, which is how I feel about James Castle and what he created here in Boise. As many of you know, James Castle was a deaf and self-taught artist living and creating outside of the mainstream here in Boise, Idaho. This close-up helps to convey the often circumscribed realities of his world. To the right, you see some of the handmade paper animal constructions he made using everyday materials and sewing them with his own hands with bits of twine. You also see one of the types of figures he might paint. It's the same kind of drawing that you see on the work table, but this is only a small slice of the vast array of the types of work he created throughout his lifetime. For most of his life, his world was largely comprised of the small suburban home, shed, and trailer he lived in with his family, which I am standing in now. But he was able to gloriously capture the specificity of his surroundings in exquisite and beautiful detail in thousands and thousands and thousands of works of art. Over a decade, he transformed his humble domicile into a hive of activity in a series of temporary artistic installations, which might include figures or sculptures like the one seen in the previous slide, in which he would then capture in his own drawings. These sort of multiples that he would do is just astounding. Like other artists you have seen in this presentation, he was curating his spaces, and in this instance, with objects of his own making. And he ingeniously used aspects of his everyday world and immediate environs as inspiration, passing them through his artistic prism in infinite variety. Like Hunter, who thinned her paint to make it last longer, Castle was also resourceful and creative with materials. The works on screen and many others were created using soot and his own saliva. In the exhibition, there is no quote by Castle, as he did not use written language in a conventional sense, and we did not want to substitute someone else's voice for his own. Yet I believe, and I'm going to go back, it's the only time I'm going to do it, yet I believe the intensity of Castle's face conveys its own language about his process and his personality. For me, what I love most is that he is a poignant example of the basic human and visceral need to create and to communicate, which lies in all of us. And that spark of creativity can be reignited, I would argue, when we visit these sites. These preserved places go well beyond amplifying and interpreting original artistic legacy, although that is super duper important. They are places that can bridge history to contemporary relevance through programming and interpretation. They are conduits for community engagement. Innovation and creativity are baked into the very essence and DNA of these spaces because of who originally lived in them. The Castle House is a wonderful example of this concept. Here, the amazing and nationally significant legacy of James Castle and his artistic genius serve as catalysts for contemporary dialogue and new artistic expression through the artist residencies that happen here. But at the core, this is a space for diverse community to engage with and feel part of something, a linking of the past to the present moment. And in this way, Castle's legacy becomes a living thing. And the city of Boise is to be commended for staying true to a mission of also being a place that serves a wide range of audiences, including their local residents, and for providing pathways for the non-hearing community to feel ownership of this place and to engage in it in ways that are meaningful to them. I urge you to discover the magic of this place for yourself, which is a national treasure and part of our collective artistic heritage. I hope this lecture has opened new possibilities for viewing the exhibition, and for those online, that you will seek to learn more. And for all of you, that it will entice you to start on your own journey of discovery and exploration. Thank you.